Millionaire walks in early, sees wife yelling at black babysitter's son. What he does stuns all. Daniel's keys jangled as he unlocked the front door of his Westchester mansion 3 hours earlier than expected. The conference in Boston had wrapped up ahead of schedule, and all he wanted was to surprise his family with the good news about his latest investment success. But as he stepped into the marble foyer, it wasn't celebration that greeted him. It was his wife's voice, sharp and venomous, echoing from the kitchen. "I've told you 100 times to stay out of this part of the house. Who do you think you are? Your mother works for us, she doesn't own the place, and neither do you." Daniel froze, his briefcase suddenly heavy in his hand. Through the archway, he could see his wife Victoria's back, her designer blouse trembling with fury as she towered over someone. He took 3 quiet steps forward and saw who was on the receiving end of her tirade. 11-year-old Marcus, their babysitter Janelle's son, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and hurt as he clutched a math textbook to his chest. I was just looking for somewhere quiet to do my homework while Mom cleans upstairs," the boy stammered, his voice barely audible. "That's what the servants' quarters are for," Victoria hissed, pointing toward the small attached apartment where Janelle sometimes stayed on late nights. "Not my kitchen with its imported Italian marble that your dirty hands are all over." Daniel scanned the countertops, spotless as always, then looked back at Marcus's face. The boy's expression shifted from hurt to resignation, a look no child should have to wear, a look that suggested this wasn't the first time. In that moment, something broke inside Daniel. 20 years of marriage, 15 years of wealth, and countless dinner parties where Victoria had charmed their guests with her philanthropy talk. All of it suddenly felt like an elaborate lie. The moral question was stark and unavoidable. Who had he become that this could happen under his roof? What would he choose now, the comfortable silence that preserved his marriage or the difficult truth that might save this child's dignity? Daniel cleared his throat. Both Victoria and Marcus turned, startled. What Daniel did next would change everything, not just for Marcus and Janelle, but for everyone in that house, most of all himself. "Victoria," he said, placing his briefcase down with deliberate care, "we need to talk." 3 months earlier, Daniel Harrison had been at his desk reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant buzzed him. "Mrs. Harrison is on line 1, sir. She says it's urgent." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Victoria urgent could mean anything from an actual emergency to a catering disaster for an upcoming gala. He picked up the phone. "What's wrong, Vic?" "Lucia quit." Victoria's voice was tight with frustration. "Just packed her things and walked out, said she couldn't work with me anymore. Can you believe the ingratitude after we sponsored her sister's visa application?" Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. This was the 3rd housekeeper in 18 months. "What happened this time?" "Nothing happened. She was being oversensitive. All I did was point out she'd missed dusting the bookshelves in the study again." Daniel knew there was more to the story, there always was, but he'd long ago learned to choose his battles with Victoria. Their marriage had evolved into something more transactional than passionate over the years. He provided the wealth from his investment firm, she maintained their social standing with perfect dinner parties and charity board memberships. "We have the Branford Foundation dinner on Saturday," Victoria continued. "I need someone immediately. I've already called 3 agencies, but they can't send anyone on such short notice." "I'll ask around at the office," Daniel replied, more to end the conversation than anything else. Later that afternoon, as Daniel walked through the financial district toward his car, he noticed a young woman in a building maintenance uniform struggling with several heavy cleaning supply bags. The handle on one bag snapped, sending bottles of cleaning solution clattering across the sidewalk. "Let me help you with that," Daniel said, crouching to gather the scattered supplies. "Thank you, sir." The woman's voice was soft but dignified. "I appreciate it." As they collected the items, Daniel noticed the woman's hands strong but gentle, with neatly trimmed nails and a small, practical watch on her wrist. No ring. "Do you work in the building?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I clean offices on the 12th through 14th floors, my day job at least," she smiled briefly. "I also do private housekeeping and childcare." Daniel hesitated, then made a decision. "I'm Daniel Harrison. My wife and I are actually looking for household help. Would you be interested in interviewing?" The woman studied him for a moment, as though assessing whether this was a legitimate offer. "I'm Janelle Thompson," she finally said. "I would be interested depending on the hours. I have an 11-year-old son to consider." "Of course," Daniel said, handing her his business card. "Call my assistant tomorrow if you'd like to discuss it further." Janelle took the card, nodding thoughtfully. "I will, Mr. Harrison, thank you." Victoria had been skeptical when Daniel suggested interviewing Janelle. "You met her on the street." but her desperation for help before the Branford dinner overrode her reservations. When Janelle arrived for the interview the next day, dressed in a simple but immaculate navy dress, Victoria had been impressed despite herself by the woman's references and experience. "I should be transparent," Janelle had said during the interview. "I'm a single mother with a son, Marcus. He's well-behaved and studies hard, but sometimes he'll need to come with me if I work late hours. I can ensure he stays in the staff quarters and doesn't disturb anyone." Victoria had frowned, but Daniel interjected before she could object. "That sounds perfectly reasonable. Family should come first." And so Janelle had joined their household staff, initially just for weekend help, but gradually taking on more hours as Victoria came to rely on her efficiency and attention to detail. What Daniel didn't know then was how differently Victoria behaved when he wasn't around. Victoria Harrison had grown up wealthy, old money wealthy, the kind that taught its children the precise angle at which to hold teacups and the importance of knowing which families were our kind and which weren't. Her father, a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, had expected perfection. Her mother, a fixture on the charity circuit, had expected impeccable social graces. Love in the Montgomery household was conditional, performance-based. Victoria had learned early that approval came from appearance and achievement, not from who she was beneath the surface. When she met Daniel during her senior year at Princeton, she'd been drawn to his brilliance and ambition. Unlike her blue-blooded classmates who expected to inherit their success, Daniel was self-made, having won a scholarship from his working-class Chicago neighborhood. His hunger for success matched her own hunger for security, and their marriage had been, in many ways, a perfect merger of complementary assets, her social connections and his financial acumen. But 20 years later, Victoria found herself haunted by a persistent sense of inadequacy. Despite her beautiful home, her successful husband, her position on 3 charitable boards, she still heard her mother's voice critiquing her choices, still felt her father's disappointment when things weren't perfect. And lately, Daniel seemed increasingly distant, working later, asking probing questions about her charity work that made her uncomfortable. Questions that suggested he was seeing through the carefully curated image she presented to the world. Victoria needed control. And when she felt that control slipping, her mother's voice grew louder in her head. Janelle Thompson represented everything Victoria both envied and resented. The woman had nothing, no wealth, no pedigree, no husband, and yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed unshakable. Worse, she had a relationship with her son that Victoria, childless by choice, sometimes found herself watching with an emotion she refused to acknowledge as longing. Marcus was a serious, thoughtful boy. Victoria had initially worried he would be disruptive, but he was usually reading quietly when he came to the house, or doing homework with an intensity of focus that was unusual for a child his age. Once, Victoria had overheard him telling Janelle he wanted to be an engineer, like Mr. Harrison. That had bothered Victoria for reasons she couldn't articulate. The idea that this child, this outsider, saw himself following in Daniel's footsteps felt like a trespass, an overstepping of invisible but important boundaries. So Victoria began enforcing those boundaries more explicitly. When Daniel was traveling, she instructed Janelle to use only the service entrance. She emphasized which areas of the house were off-limits to both Janelle and Marcus. She began checking surfaces for dust with white gloves, leaving notes about areas needing attention in Janelle's cleaning supplies. Janelle never complained, never argued. She simply adjusted, worked harder, stayed later. And somehow that dignified resilience only made Victoria resent her more. The day of the confrontation had been building for weeks. Victoria had woken with a migraine, made worse by an email from her mother criticizing the centerpieces Victoria had chosen for an upcoming charity gala. By the time she came downstairs at noon, her head was pounding, and the sight of Marcus sitting at her kitchen island, pencil in hand as he worked through a math problem, had been the final straw. Janelle Thompson had not planned to become a single mother at 23. She'd been a promising engineering student with a full scholarship when she met Darius Williams at a campus social justice meeting. Brilliant, charismatic, and passionate about community activism, Darius had swept Janelle off her feet with his vision of creating technology education programs for underserved neighborhoods. When she discovered she was pregnant in her junior year, they'd made plans. She would finish her degree while Darius started their nonprofit. They'd get married after graduation, raise their child surrounded by purpose and community. But 6 months after Marcus was born, Darius received a dream job offer from a tech company in Silicon Valley. The opportunity would give them financial stability, he argued. He'd send for them once he was settled. The calls and money transfers grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. By the time Marcus was 2, Janelle had been forced to face reality. Darius wasn't coming back. With her scholarship funds exhausted and a toddler to support, she'd made the wrenching decision to leave school temporarily. Temporary became permanent as the demands of survival took precedence over her dreams. But Janelle had not given up on education. She'd simply transferred her ambitions to her son. Every night, no matter how exhausted she was from cleaning offices and houses, she read to Marcus. She saved every spare dollar for books, for educational toys, for a second-hand laptop where they could watch MIT engineering lectures together. "Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you," she told Marcus. "Your mind is your most powerful tool." Marcus had inherited his mother's quiet determination and his father's quick intelligence. By 5th grade, he was doing 7th grade math, devouring books on robotics and structural engineering. His teachers had suggested accelerated programs, specialized schools opportunities that Janelle was determined to provide somehow. The job at the Harrisons had seemed like a blessing at first. The pay was excellent. The staff apartment meant Marcus had a quiet place to study when he accompanied her, and Mr. Harrison sometimes left engineering magazines on the counter where Marcus would find them. An act of kindness Janelle suspected was intentional. Mrs. Harrison was challenging. Janelle had worked for difficult employers before and had developed a thick skin and a strategic approach. Exceed expectations, anticipate needs, maintain professionalism at all costs. She needed this job not just for the money, but for the flexibility that allowed her to attend Marcus's school events and the connection to Mr. Harrison, who had mentioned an educational foundation he chaired that provided scholarships. So Janelle endured Mrs. Harrison's increasing coldness, her arbitrary rules, her thinly veiled contempt. She explained to Marcus which areas of the house were approved for them and which weren't, teaching him the invisible geography of privilege without explicitly naming it as such. "We're guests in their home," she told Marcus. "We respect their space and their rules, even when we don't understand them." But that afternoon, Mrs. Harrison had asked Janelle to clean the library shelves over 600 books that needed to be removed, dusted, and replaced exactly as they had been. The task would take hours, and Marcus had a science project due the next day. He'd set up at the small desk in the staff apartment, but the Wi-Fi signal there was weak, and he needed to download reference materials. "Mom, I just need to use the kitchen counter for 15 minutes to download some files," he'd whispered to Janelle as she balanced on a ladder, carefully removing leather-bound first editions. "The Wi-Fi is stronger there." Janelle had hesitated. Mrs. Harrison was supposed to be at a luncheon until 3. "Just be quick and clean up after yourself," she'd finally said. "Mrs. Harrison should be out for at least another hour." Victoria Harrison had returned early, her migraine having cut short her charity luncheon. And she'd found Marcus sitting at her kitchen island, his textbook and notebook spread out neatly, his laptop open to a NASA educational site about structural engineering. "Victoria, we need to talk." Daniel's voice cut through the tension in the kitchen. Marcus stood frozen, his textbook clutched to his chest like a shield. Victoria turned, her face shifting from anger to surprise. "Daniel, you're back early." "I was just explaining to— I heard exactly what you were explaining," Daniel interrupted, his voice level but with an edge Victoria hadn't heard before. "Marcus, would you please give Mrs. Harrison and me a few minutes alone? I believe your mother is in the library." Marcus nodded, relief flashing across his face as he hurried out of the kitchen. Daniel waited until the boy's footsteps faded before speaking again. "How long has this been going on?" Victoria blinked, her hand moving reflexively to smooth her hair. "What do you mean? I simply found him using our kitchen without permission. You know how I feel about maintaining boundaries with household staff." Daniel walked to the kitchen island, noting the perfectly arranged school supplies, the NASA website still open on the laptop screen. He touched the countertop Marcus had supposedly soiled with his dirty hands. "Boundaries," he repeated quietly. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Victoria's chin lifted defensively. "You know how much I paid for this marble. It's not unreasonable to expect people to respect our home." "Our home," Daniel's laugh was hollow. "When did our home become a place where children are humiliated for doing their homework? When did we become people who use words like servants' quarters? That's not who I am, Victoria, and I didn't think it was who you were either." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting." You've always had a soft spot for their kind, but their kind. Daniel's voice rose slightly. What kind is that exactly, Victoria? Hardworking, intelligent, respectful, because those are the qualities I see in Janelle and Marcus. You know what I mean, Victoria said, her voice dropping. People who aren't like us. And what are we like exactly? Daniel gestured around the gleaming kitchen. Is this what defines us, the imported marble, the zip code? The social circle that talks about charity while treating actual human beings like furniture? Victoria's face flushed. That's unfair. I do real work with my charities. I'm making a difference. Are you? Daniel asked quietly. Or are you performing the role of someone making a difference? Because I saw the real thing this morning at my conference, people developing affordable housing solutions, creating educational opportunities in underserved communities. And do you know who was leading one of the most innovative projects? A young man who grew up in public housing, who someone gave a chance to when they could have just seen him as not like us. Victoria turned away, her arms crossing protectively over her chest. You've never complained about my charity work before. Because I didn't look closely enough, Daniel admitted. I was too busy building the firm, trusting that you were handling our social responsibilities. That was my failure. He walked around the island until he stood facing his wife. Victoria, today I saw you terrify a child for sitting at our kitchen counter doing homework. I heard you use words I never thought would come out of your mouth. That's not a boundary issue. That's a character issue. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, whether from genuine remorse or frustration at being challenged. Daniel couldn't tell. So now I'm a terrible person because I expect rules to be followed in my own home. Oh, Daniel said, his voice softening slightly. You're someone who's lost sight of what actually matters, and so was I until about 5 minutes ago. He took a deep breath. I'm going to speak with Janelle and Marcus. I'm going to apologize for what happened in our home, my home, and then you and I are going to have a longer conversation about what happens next. Victoria's face paled. What do you mean, what happens next? Daniel looked at his wife of 20 years, really looked at her. The carefully highlighted hair, the designer clothes, the perfect manicure, the fear behind her eyes. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I know I can't keep living in a home where wealth has become a weapon, where we've forgotten that the people who work for us are people first. I won't do it, Victoria. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Victoria standing alone beside her precious imported marble. Daniel found Janelle and Marcus in the library where she had returned to her work dusting books. Marcus sat in a corner armchair, his school materials gathered close to him, his eyes watchful as Daniel entered. Janelle stood straighter, her face composed but her eyes reflecting concern. Mr. Harrison, I apologize for any disturbance. Marcus knows he should have stayed in the apartment. Daniel raised his hand. Please, Janelle, I'm the one who should be apologizing. What happened in the kitchen was unacceptable. He turned to Marcus. I'm deeply sorry you were spoken to that way in my home, Marcus. You did nothing wrong. This house should be a place where learning is welcome, not condemned. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, but he remained silent, glancing at his mother for guidance. Janelle placed a protective hand on her son's shoulder. That's very kind of you, Mr. Harrison, but we understand our place here. Mrs. Harrison has certain expectations that are unreasonable and frankly cruel, Daniel interrupted gently. And they end today. He gestured to a nearby reading table. May we sit for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss with both of you. Janelle hesitated, then nodded, guiding Marcus to the table. They sat, backs straight, hands folded, the posture of people who had learned to make themselves smaller in certain spaces. The realization sent a wave of shame through Daniel. I saw the NASA website Marcus was looking at, he began. Structural engineering, right? That's a fascinating field. Marcus nodded cautiously. Yes, sir, I'm doing a project on how different bridge designs distribute weight. That's advanced for your grade level, Daniel observed. A hint of pride crossed Janelle's face. Marcus is taking accelerated math and science. His teachers have suggested specialized programs, but... She trailed off, the financial reality unspoken but understood. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Janelle, how would you feel about a change in your employment arrangement here? Janelle's face remained carefully neutral, but Daniel saw her hand tighten on Marcus's. She thought he was firing her. I'm proposing that instead of hourly housekeeping work, you take on a salaried position as our house manager, he continued quickly. Full benefits, regular hours, and use of the guest house rather than the staff apartment. It would give you and Marcus more space and privacy. Janelle's composure slipped, surprise flickering across her face. That's very generous, Mr. Harrison, but I'm not sure Mrs. Harrison would. Mrs. Harrison and I are going to work through some things, Daniel said firmly. But this decision is mine to make as well, and it's overdue. He turned to Marcus. And for you, young man, I have a proposition. I happen to know that Westridge Academy has an exceptional engineering program for gifted students. Their scholarship applications for next fall are still open for another week. Marcus's eyes widened. Westridge was one of the top college preparatory schools in the state and far beyond the financial reach of a single mother working in housekeeping. Mr. Harrison, Janelle began, her voice tight with emotion. That's not necessary. We can't accept. It's not charity, Janelle, Daniel said quietly. It's opportunity, the same kind someone gave me when I was growing up in Chicago's South Side. I wouldn't be where I am today if someone hadn't seen potential in me beyond my circumstances. He looked directly at Marcus. I sit on Westridge's scholarship committee. They're looking for exactly the kind of mind that solves bridge design problems for fun. All you have to do is apply and show them what you can do. The rest will take care of itself. Marcus looked from Daniel to his mother, a spark of hope lighting his eyes. Mom, could I really? Janelle swallowed hard, years of practical caution warring with maternal ambition for her son. We can discuss it, she finally said, which made Marcus break into a wide smile. Daniel stood. Take the rest of the day off, both of you. We can talk more about the house manager position tomorrow when things have settled a bit here. As they gathered their things, Daniel added, and Marcus, the kitchen, the library, any room with books or a decent Wi-Fi signal, they're all study spaces as far as I'm concerned. This house should support learning, not hinder it. After Janelle and Marcus left, Daniel stood in the silent library, surrounded by books that were dusted weekly but rarely read. The irony wasn't lost on him. It was time to return to the kitchen and continue his conversation with Victoria. But first, he pulled out his phone and made a call to his oldest friend, Thomas, who was both his attorney and the wisest person he knew. Tom, I need some advice. It's about Victoria, about our marriage. Things need to change, and I'm not sure where to start. In the coming days, the Harrison household underwent a seismic shift. Victoria initially retreated to their vacation house in the Hamptons, claiming she needed space to process Daniel's accusations. In her absence, Daniel had 3 significant conversations. The first was with Janelle, formalizing her new position as house manager with a salary that recognized her organizational skills and work ethic. When he handed her the contract Thomas had drawn up, including health insurance, retirement benefits, and educational assistance, she had stared at it in disbelief. Mr. Harrison, this is more than generous. It's fair, he'd interrupted gently. Actually, it's still less than fair, considering how you've been treated until now. The second conversation was with Marcus, helping him prepare his application for Westridge Academy. Daniel had been impressed by the boys' project on bridge design, which showed an intuitive understanding of engineering principles beyond his years. You remind me of myself at your age, Daniel told him as they reviewed his application always taking things apart to see how they worked. Marcus had looked up from his laptop. Did you always want to be an engineer? I did, Daniel nodded, though life took me in a different direction eventually. Finance uses some of the same skills, analyzing systems, identifying stress points, building solutions. My dad was supposed to be an engineer, Marcus said quietly. Mom says he was really smart. Daniel had chosen his next words carefully. Your mother is one of the smartest people I know, and so are you. Some of the most brilliant engineers I work with didn't follow traditional paths. The third conversation had been the most difficult with Victoria upon her return from the Hamptons. They'd sat in Daniel's study, the room suddenly feeling formal despite the years they'd shared in this house. I've had time to think, Victoria began, her voice subdued. I may have overreacted with the boy. Daniel had studied his wife's face, noting the careful makeup that couldn't quite hide her exhaustion. This isn't just about Marcus, Vic. It's about who we've become, who you've become. Victoria's eyes flashed. Who I've become exactly who you wanted, the perfect corporate wife, the hostess, the philanthropist, the woman who makes your life run smoothly while you build your empire. I never asked you to be cruel to people with less power than you, Daniel said quietly. I never wanted a marriage where wealth became a substitute for character. Victoria looked away. You didn't grow up like I did. You don't understand the pressure, the expectations. You're right, I didn't. I grew up watching my mother clean other people's houses, coming home with stories about how some clients treated her like she was invisible while others treated her like a human being. He leaned forward. And I promised myself that if I ever had money, I'd be the second kind. Tears filled Victoria's eyes. So now I'm the villain in your success story. The cautionary tale about wealth corrupting. No, Daniel said more gently. You're someone who got lost somewhere along the way, and maybe I did too by not noticing sooner. He paused. I've been thinking about what you said about becoming who I wanted you to be. Did I ever actually tell you what I wanted, Victoria? Did we ever talk about the kind of people we hope to become together? Victoria wiped at her tears, careful not to smudge her makeup. We talked about success. About proving ourselves. To whom? Daniel asked quietly. The question hung between them, unanswerable and damning. 4 weeks after the kitchen confrontation, Daniel stood in the doorway of what had once been Victoria's home office, now transformed into a bright study space. 2 desks faced the window overlooking the garden, one for Janelle, who was pursuing online courses to complete her engineering degree, and one for Marcus, who had received his acceptance to Westridge Academy 2 days earlier. Is this configuration working for both of you? Daniel asked. We could adjust if you need more space. Janelle looked up from her laptop where she was working on the household accounts, one of her new responsibilities as house manager. It's perfect, Mr. Harrison. Having natural light makes such a difference. Daniel, he reminded her gently, we're colleagues now. Marcus looked up from his pre-academy summer reading assignment. Mom still can't get used to that, he said with a grin. Practices saying Daniel when you're not around, but then gets all formal when you're here. Marcus, Janelle admonished, but she was smiling too. Daniel laughed. Well, old habits take time to change. Speaking of which, I wanted to let you both know that Mrs. Harrison will be returning tomorrow. The smile faded from Janelle's face, replaced by a careful neutrality that Daniel had come to recognize as her professional mask. I see. Should we return to the staff apartment? No, Daniel said firmly. The guest house is your home now. That's non-negotiable. Victoria's absence had stretched from days into weeks, as she and Daniel navigated their new reality through careful phone calls and tentative meetings in neutral locations, restaurants, parks, their therapist's office. The initial anger had gradually given way to painful honesty about the cracks in their marriage that had been there long before the incident with Marcus. Victoria has been doing some important work while she's been away, Daniel explained. She's been volunteering, actually volunteering, not just sitting on boards with a literacy program in an underserved area of the city. And she's been meeting with a therapist to work through some of her perspectives. That's good to hear, Janelle said diplomatically. Daniel hesitated, then continued. She'd like to apologize to both of you in person. I told her that would be entirely up to you whether you're comfortable with that conversation and when you might be ready for it. Marcus looked at his mother, his young face serious. Janelle considered for a long moment. We can hear what she has to say, she finally decided. People deserve the chance to make amends. Daniel nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude for Janelle's grace, a quality Victoria was just beginning to learn. Later that evening, as Daniel prepared for bed in what had been the master suite but was now just his bedroom, Victoria would be staying in the guest suite upon her return. He reflected on the changes of the past month. His marriage hung in a fragile balance. The couple's therapist had been clear. Reconciliation was possible but would require fundamental change, particularly from Victoria. And for the first time, Victoria seemed willing to do that work, humbled by the consequences of her behavior and Daniel's unflinching response to it. Meanwhile, the household had found a new rhythm. Janelle's management had brought efficiency and warmth to the once sterile mansion. The unnecessary formality had given way to purpose. Rooms that had been maintained for appearance rather than use were now repurposed, Victoria's rarely used home office becoming a study, the formal dining room now hosting community board meetings for educational initiatives Daniel was spearheading. As he turned out the light, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Nervous about tomorrow. What if they won't accept my apology? He typed back. Then you'll respect that and keep working to be better. That's all any of us can do. Victoria's return to the Harrison home was marked by none of the fanfare that typically accompanied her arrivals. No fresh flower arrangements, no catered lunch, no household staff lined up to receive her. Instead, Daniel met her at the door with a simple hug and helped carry her bags to the guest suite. It looks different, she observed as they walked through the house. The formal displays of wealth remained, the architecture and art were unchanged, but there was a lived-in quality that had been missing before. Books lay open on side tables. A chess game in progress sat on a window seat. The kitchen showed signs of actual cooking rather than just catering. It feels different, Daniel agreed. More like a home and less like a museum, he hesitated. Janelle and Marcus are willing to meet with you after lunch if you're ready. Victoria nodded, adjusting the simple cardigan she wore over jeans, an outfit Daniel couldn't remember seeing her in before. I've been rehearsing what to say, but it all sounds so inadequate. Just be honest, Daniel suggested. They're not expecting perfection, just humanity. The meeting took place in the garden, neutral territory where the formalities of the house fell away. Janelle and Marcus arrived together, both dressed casually but neatly, their postures alert but not defensive. Victoria had positioned herself on a bench rather than at the head of the table, a subtle but significant shift in power dynamics. She stood when they approached. "Thank you both for agreeing to see me," she began, her voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. "I owe you an apology, a profound one. The way I spoke to Marcus that day was inexcusable. The way I've treated both of you has been unkind and unfair." She looked directly at Marcus. "No child should ever be made to feel unwelcome or lesser, especially when they're simply trying to learn and grow. I'm deeply sorry, Marcus." The boy nodded solemnly, accepting her words without offering immediate forgiveness, a mature response that made Victoria realize she had never really seen him clearly before. Turning to Janelle, Victoria continued, "And to you, Janelle, I apologize for failing to recognize your dignity, your intelligence, and your extraordinary devotion as a mother. The boundaries I created weren't about protecting our home. They were about protecting my own sense of superiority. I'm ashamed of that now." Janelle's expression remained measured. "May I ask what's changed? Why the apology now?" It was a fair question, direct yet not accusatory. Victoria took a deep breath. "Several things have changed, most importantly me. When Daniel confronted me about my behavior, it forced me to see myself through his eyes, and I didn't like what I saw." She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous gesture Daniel had rarely seen. "I've spent these weeks working with a therapist to understand why I felt so threatened by people I perceived as different from me." Victoria looked up, meeting Janelle's eyes directly. "I was raised to believe my value came from status and appearance. I've been volunteering at a literacy center, and one of the women there, a grandmother raising her grandchildren after their mother died, told me something that stopped me cold. She said, 'Honey, nobody's going to remember what china you used at your fancy parties. They'll remember how you made them feel.'" Victoria's voice wavered. "I made you and Marcus feel unwelcome and unworthy in this house. There's no excuse for that. All I can say is that I'm committed to changing not just my behavior, but the thinking behind it." Silence fell over the garden. A bee buzzed among the lavender. Marcus shifted slightly, looking up at his mother. Janelle's hand rested on his shoulder, a touchpoint of reassurance. "Thank you for your apology," Janelle finally said. "I can't speak for Marcus, but I believe in second chances. Actions will matter more than words going forward." Victoria nodded, accepting the measured response. "I understand. I don't expect immediate forgiveness. I just want the opportunity to demonstrate change." Marcus spoke up, his voice steady. "My teacher says when you know better, you do better. I hope you do better now." Victoria's eyes widened slightly at the simple wisdom from this child she had dismissed. "That's very wise, Marcus. I'm trying to know better and do better." Daniel, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "I thought perhaps we could all have lunch together. Nothing formal, just sandwiches and conversation. A new beginning." Janelle hesitated, then nodded. "We'd like that." As they walked back toward the house, Victoria held back slightly, touching Daniel's arm. "They're extraordinary people," she said quietly. "How did I not see that before?" "You weren't looking," Daniel replied simply. "But you're looking now, that's what matters." Over the following months, the Harrison household continued its transformation, as did the relationships within it. Victoria moved gradually from the guest suite back to sharing Daniel's room, their marriage rebuilding on a foundation of greater honesty and shared purpose rather than complementary ambitions. Victoria's volunteer work expanded from once-weekly sessions to a regular commitment. She discovered a talent for connecting with the women there, many of whom were single mothers like Janelle, without condescension or savior complex. She brought to the literacy program the same organizational skills and attention to detail she'd previously reserved for charity galas, but now with genuine investment in outcomes rather than appearances. One evening, 6 months after the kitchen confrontation, Daniel arrived home to find Victoria and Marcus at the dining room table surrounded by craft supplies. "It's for the Literacy Center's family night," Victoria explained, somewhat sheepishly. "I volunteered to create reading journey maps for each family, but I'm hopeless at the artistic part." "Mrs. Harrison Victoria asked if I could help," Marcus added, carefully cutting out paper stars. "I'm good at design stuff." Daniel raised an eyebrow at the casual use of Victoria's first name, a small but significant marker of the changing dynamics in the household. Victoria caught his look and smiled. "Marcus is teaching me about visual communication principles. Did you know there's actual science behind which colors and shapes attract attention? He's brilliant at it." The genuine admiration in her voice was new, free from the performative praise she had once used at charity events when acknowledging underprivileged youth. "I'm not surprised," Daniel said, smiling at Marcus. "How's the Westridge Engineering Club coming along?" Marcus's face lit up. "We're building a solar-powered car for the regional competition. I'm on the structural team." "And he's the youngest member," Victoria added proudly, as though Marcus were her own child rather than someone she had once tried to confine to servants' quarters. Later that night, as Daniel and Victoria prepared for bed, he found himself studying his wife's face, softer now, less perfectly maintained, but somehow more beautiful for it. "What?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "I was just thinking about how much has changed," he said. "How much you've changed." Victoria's expression grew serious. "Do you think it's enough? Sometimes I worry that I'm still the person who said those terrible things." Daniel considered the question carefully. "I think we're all capable of both kindness and cruelty. The question is which one we choose to nurture." He took her hand. "You're choosing kindness now, deliberately, even when it's difficult. That matters." Victoria leaned against his shoulder. "I was so afraid of losing status, losing control. I didn't realize how much of myself I was losing in the process. And now I measure wealth differently," she said simply. 1 year after the confrontation in the kitchen, the Harrisons hosted a celebration. Not the formal gala Victoria would have orchestrated in the past, but a warm gathering marking several milestones. Marcus's completion of his first year at Westridge with honors, Janelle's halfway point in her engineering degree program, and the official launch of the Harrison Educational Equity Foundation. The house was filled with an eclectic mix of guests: Daniel's business associates, educators from Westridge, volunteers from the Literacy Center, families from the scholarship programs, and even a few of Victoria's old social circle who had proven themselves open to the changes in the Harrison household. The marble kitchen island where the confrontation had occurred was now covered with a potluck spread representing the diverse backgrounds of their guests. Children moved freely through rooms once considered showcases rather than living spaces. In the library, Marcus was giving tour of the engineering books Daniel had added to the collection. As Victoria circulated among guests, ensuring everyone felt welcome, she overheard a conversation between two of her former charity board members. "I hardly recognize Victoria anymore," one murmured. "She used to be so particular about everything." "I know," the other replied. "Charles and I were shocked when we got the invitation saying, 'Casual attire, families welcome.' But I have to say, she seems happier." Victoria smiled to herself as she moved on, no longer concerned with their assessment of her. Their approval had once been her currency. Now it was merely incidental. She found Daniel in conversation with Thomas, the attorney who had not only helped restructure the household staffing arrangements, but had also been instrumental in establishing the foundation. "The first round of scholarships will be announced next month," Thomas was saying. 20 full rides to students from underrepresented backgrounds entering STEM fields." "That's just the beginning," Daniel replied. "We're already looking at expanding to include mentorships and internships." Victoria joined them, slipping her hand into Daniel's. "Janelle had an excellent suggestion for the foundation. She thinks we should include stipends for parents, particularly single parents, to attend school events and teacher conferences without losing wages." Daniel smiled at her. "That's exactly the kind of real-world insight we need. Is she enjoying her new role on the advisory board?" "She is, though she insists on keeping her house manager position too. Something about maintaining perspective," Victoria said with a hint of admiration. Across the room, Janelle was deep in conversation with an engineering professor from Daniel's alma mater. Marcus stood nearby, clearly following the technical discussion with keen interest. Watching them, Victoria felt a now familiar pang, not of resentment as before, but of recognition of the extraordinary bond between mother and son. As though sensing her gaze, Janelle looked up and gave Victoria a small smile, not the careful, professional smile of an employee, but the genuine acknowledgement between women who had moved from adversaries to something approaching friends. Later, as the gathering wound down, Daniel found himself alone with Marcus in the garden. The boy, almost a teenager now, was sketching ideas for a treehouse he wanted to build in the old oak. "Those are impressive plans," Daniel observed, looking over Marcus's shoulder. "Structurally sound, too," Marcus beamed at the praise. "Mom's been teaching me what she's learning in her engineering courses. She says I need to understand the math behind the designs." "She's right," Daniel nodded. "That's what separates good engineers from great ones." Marcus hesitated, then asked, "Can I ask you something, Mr. Harrison?" Of course, and it's still Daniel, remember. Right, sorry. Marcus set down his pencil. That day when you came home early and Mrs. Harrison was yelling at me, what made you say something? You could have just ignored it. Daniel considered the question carefully. I saw someone with power using it to hurt someone without power. In that moment, I had a choice about what kind of man I wanted to be. He looked directly at Marcus. We always have that choice every day. Sometimes it's dramatic, like that day in the kitchen. Usually it's smaller choices that nobody else sees. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. My mom says character is what you do when nobody's watching. Your mom is very wise, Daniel smiled. And I was watching that day. I couldn't unsee what was happening or who we had become. Pretending everything was fine would have made me complicit. I'm glad you said something, Marcus said quietly. It changed everything. Daniel reflected on the truth of that statement, how a single moment of moral clarity had indeed changed everything. His marriage, now rebuilt on honesty rather than performance. His home, transformed from a showcase into a community hub. His understanding of his own privilege and responsibility. Sometimes, Daniel said, doing the right thing costs you something, but not doing the right thing costs you much more, it costs you yourself. As they sat together in the garden, Daniel thought about the young man Marcus was becoming and the values being shaped within him. He thought about Janelle pursuing the dreams she had deferred. He thought about Victoria, who had faced her worst self and chosen a different path forward. And he thought about himself, a man who had once defined success through wealth accumulation, now measuring it by the strength of human connections and the courage to stand for dignity in small, crucial moments. That evening, after all the guests had departed and the house was quiet, Daniel stood in the kitchen where everything had changed a year ago. Victoria joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist. What are you thinking about? She asked. About power, he replied. How we use it, how it uses us if we're not careful. Victoria nodded against his shoulder. I was thinking about something Marcus said to me today. He asked if I remembered what I said to him that day in the kitchen. Daniel turned to face her. What did you tell him? The truth, Victoria said. That I remember every word and that remembering helps me choose differently now. She paused. Then he thanked me for changing. Can you imagine, after how I treated him, he thanked me for doing the bare minimum of decent human behavior. That speaks to his character, Daniel observed, and to Janelle's parenting. It does, Victoria agreed. But it also speaks to possibility, that people can change, that relationships can heal, that better versions of ourselves are always waiting if we're brave enough to become them. Daniel kissed her forehead gently. That's a wisdom worth building a life around. Together they turned off the kitchen lights and moved through the house, no longer a monument to wealth and status, but a home where dignity was the true measure of value and moral courage the greatest form of success. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge assumptions and celebrate the power of moral courage. How has someone standing up for what's right changed your life? Share your experiences in the comments below.